There are just a few style videos left in this one. We're going to focus on the input right here, the error message that shows up for the form, and finally, the individual items, which currently look terrible. That still leaves the modal. We'll focus on that a little bit later. But when we're done with this video, we'll have these styles completely set up for everything but the modal. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to kick things off by focusing on the individual options. So over inside of components, we can make a brand new file. I'm going to call this partial option. So it's underscore option.scss, and inside of here, we're going to add a few things. But before we do, let's go ahead and close down some of the files. I'm going to leave open style settings and option. I'm going to close down indecision app and options, and I will crack open the option component where we'll actually be using the classes we define. Before we define anything, let's go ahead and import it over here. At import. And the path is ./components, and inside of components, we have the new option partial. Excellent. Now we can actually set up the BEM related classes that we're going to be using for option. And the first one is just going to be the option block. We need to apply some styles to the container that houses the text and the button. Much like we used the Flexbox display mode to get this stuff over here and this stuff over here, we're going to do the exact same thing down below. That means in option, we're going to be using display flex, and we'll be using justify content, setting that equal to space between. Remember, we want to distribute the leftover space between the two elements. Now, if we go ahead and save this, we can actually apply the class and start seeing our styles. Over here inside of option.js, we're going to toss that on the root div. That'll be class name equals option. And once we have that in place, we can go ahead and actually save things. And the end result is our button is kicked out over here and the text is sitting over here. Now, it's not a perfect solution just yet, but we can just tweak this a little bit more to make it look a whole lot nicer. The next thing we're going to do is set the padding, giving us a little bit of space inside of that box. We're going to set the padding equal to L size for the top and the bottom. And for the left and the right, we're going to go ahead and use M size. So that should make things look a whole lot nicer. And when the browser refreshes, you can see we now have a lot of space between the items in the list. So if I have test and test1, we can see they show up in a nice way. Now we are also going to add a border out the bottom of every single one of our options. So we'll set that up as well. Keeping things in alphabetical order, that'll be a border bottom. And we're going to set that equal to a 1 pixel border. And we'll keep that as solid. And we're going to go ahead and lighten light blue by 10%. Now, if we go ahead and save the option partial, we're going to have that light border between every single item, which is awesome. And that's the same border we use when we have no items in place. As we add the items, those items have borders as well. So now that we have this in place, what I want to focus on is what's inside of the option. And we're also going to focus on getting the number for the option showing up before the option text. So right here, we have 1, we have 2, we have 3. And if I were to add an item that wasn't just a number, like an option for a coffee shop, blue bottle, right here, we see we have 4 followed by our item. So let's go ahead and focus on getting that number showing up, and then we'll focus on styling the 2 items sitting inside. To get the count passed in, what we're going to do is just make a quick tweak to the options component. The options component runs through all of the options with map and outputs the individual option. But map not only gives you the item you're currently looking at, it also gives you access to the index. So is this the first item, in which case the index would be 0? Is it the second item, in which case the index would be 1? Now we're going to go ahead and take this index and use it to pass down a brand new prop to option. We're going to call this one count. And we're going to set it equal to the index plus 1. So if it's the first item, we don't want to show 0, which would be the correct index. We want to show 1. So all we're going to do is increment the index by 1. That's going to go from counting by 0 to counting by 1. Now that we have this in place, we can save the options file and we can actually use the count over inside of option. And we're going to use it right here. Currently, the text isn't sitting inside of any special tag. We're going to go ahead and toss it inside of a p tag. So we'll create the p tag. We will then set up the count by accessing it. That'll be props.count. Then we'll put the period and the space between the number and the actual option text. Right here, we're going to go ahead and use what we just had, which was props.option text. And now we're going to have everything in place like we're seeing in the final version of the application. If I head over here, you see we have 1 test, and then we have 2, 1, 2, 3. So now that we have the numbers showing up, let's focus on actually styling the stuff inside. The button is already looking great. All we really need to focus on is the paragraph tag over here, and we're going to go ahead and give that a selector. Over inside of the option parcel, that's going to be .option __. It is going to be an element of the option block, and we're going to call this one text. There we go. Now we can take this class and we can apply it to the paragraph to actually get some styles in there. Class name equals option ___ text. Now all we have to do is write the styles for the option text element, and we will be all done for the individual list items. Let's kick things off by setting the color. Currently we got black on blue, which is hard to read. We're going to go ahead and set that one to pure white as opposed to the off-white color we've been using previously. We're then going to go ahead and set up some font-based styles. I'm going to set the font weight equal to 500. And I'm also going to adjust the font size, getting that up to 2 rem. And finally, we're going to go ahead and reset the margin. Now, if we go ahead and save the option partial over inside of the application, we're going to see the final styles for the individual item showing up. If you don't want to see the really narrow version of the application, you can always take the dev tools and close them or just toss them on the right-hand side. This allows you to use the developer tools while also viewing the entire application without it getting cut off. So we have all of this in place. The last thing we're going to focus on is the form down below. Then we'll wrap up this video. To do that, we're going to be creating, once again, a brand new file. We're going to have many small files as opposed to one big one. That makes it really easy to track down the code when you're trying to change something. If I'm trying to change something related to option, I can be pretty sure it's somewhere here in this 14-line file, as opposed to a really big 300-line file, which is way harder to look through. Let's go ahead and create a brand new partial for the form. I'm going to call this one add option. .scss, and don't forget your underscore since this is a partial. And once we have that in place, we can go ahead and close down the option partial and actually get this guy imported over inside of the styles file, keeping things in alphabetical order. At import. And the path we're looking for is relative to the current directory. It is in the components folder, and the partial is called add option. Perfect. Now we have the add option file all wired up, and the only thing I'm going to do before we start adding any selectors or styles is to crack open the component where we're mostly going to be using that. And this would be inside of the add option component. In here, we have our form, we have our inputs, our buttons, we have the error message, all things that we do want to add styles for. Now, the button already has the correct styles applied. We really just need to position it correctly. What we're really going to focus on styling is the error message and the input. I'm going to start by styling the paragraph tag. I'm going to add on a class name. Class name equals right here. We're going to call this one add option error. And then we can go ahead and actually define that class over inside of our partial. I'll leave a comment, add option error, and I'll target it by class name. Add -option -error, and now we can apply some styles. And the first style we're going to apply is color, setting the color equal to the off-white value we've been using for some of our text. Then we're also going to set the font style, allowing us to use italic text for this error message by setting font style to italic. Now we're just going to focus on a little bit of spacing. We're going to add some padding to this error message. We're going to stick with 0 on the top and the bottom, and we're going to use the M size variable on the left and the right, making sure the error isn't pressed up against the edge. The last thing we're going to apply is a bit of a margin. We're going to use that just on the top, and the value we'll use will just be M size again. And that's just going to be for the top. So top, right, bottom, left. We're going to leave the right, bottom, and left at 0. And now we can go ahead and save the add option partial and check out our work. I'm going to submit the form with invalid data. And right there, you can see we're headed in the right direction. The error itself looks good. All we have to do is actually style the form down below. Then we'll be done. To do that, we're going to be adding a new class onto the form. What we want to do is position things using Flexbox similar to what we've done before, but slightly different. We don't just want to distribute space between these two. We want to actually have the input take up all of the extra space. So as we can see over here, we have our button and everything else is left up to the input. So if the button text were to increase and get a little wider, the input would have a little less space, but it is going to be nice and flexible. So as the browser decreases, we can see that the button size doesn't change, but the input size does change. And we want that exact same effect for our application. So step 1 is going to be to add a class onto the form. I'm going to go ahead and toss that on right here, class name, setting it equal to, and we're going to use the add option class name. Then we can go ahead and actually save our work and target it over inside of the partial. Add option. We're going to target it by the class name that we just set up. And right here, we are going to start with display flex, but we're not going to go ahead and actually use justify content. That's not what we want. Now, if we save our work right now, what's going to happen? Over in the browser, we're going to see that everything takes up the same height, which is great, and things are stacked left to right, which is also good. What we need to do, though, is teach the input how to grow. So we need to tell that input that it should grow to take up all available space. How are we going to get that done? We're just going to add a single style to it. Let's go ahead and set up an element for add option right here, class name, setting it equal to add hyphen option underscore underscore input. Now we have a way to target that input and tell it to take up all available space. Right here, add option, input, and the property we use for this is called flex grow. Now by default, we can see that the elements inside of a display flex element don't automatically grow. But if I set grow equal to 1, I'm telling it to grow to take up the available space. And the end result is what we want. Over here, the input takes up all of the space left over, and it still gives the button all the space it needs. It just takes up the rest. So as the screen gets bigger and smaller, the input grows and shrinks. And obviously, once we reach that max width, the input doesn't get any wider because the container it's in doesn't change. Now this isn't the only style we're going to be applying to the form or the input. We do obviously want to apply the rest of the styles, giving us a little bit of space and also changing this into the dark UI input as seen here, as opposed to just the white box input. To get that done, let's go ahead and move over to the add option selector. Right here, we're going to start off by adding a little padding into the mix. And we'll use M size on all 4 sides. And the end result is just going to be a form that has a little bit of space. And as we add our error message, we're also going to have some space between the actual input and the error. Now things look nice and clean. All we have to do from here is to style the input. And we're going to kick things off by setting up the background. Background. And the background is going to equal the dark blue color we already have in place. Right here, dark blue. Now, not only are we going to set a background, we're also going to use that exact same border effect that we used on the button. So on our buttons, if you remember, we used a 0.3 REM border on the bottom, and we just took the button color and darkened it by 10%. And that is the same approach we're going to take right here for the input. So we can set border bottom equal to, then we're going to go ahead and define it. So 0.3 REM, solid, and we are going to darken the color, that's the background, that would be dark blue, not bark blue. And we're going to darken it by 10%. Now remember, this is just going to override the border bottom. It's not going to touch the top left or right border, so we're going to go ahead and remove those borders. By setting border to none first, then we'll configure the border bottom to be exactly what we want. And over here, we can see that everything is looking real nice. We have all of the actual style in place. We still have some spacing problems though, so let's go ahead and tweak those. What I want to do is set a little bit of space just on the right. That's going to give us a little bit of space between the input and the button. Obviously, this is up to your own discretion. You can feel free to tweak any of these styles to fit your own personal taste. I am going to use margin right though to set a margin on the right, and I'm going to be sticking with the value S size. We really just want a tiny bit of space between the two. And over here, we can see that is exactly what we're getting, and things are looking pretty nice. There are just two more properties to tweak, and these properties are things that aren't easy to see until you start typing. So let's start typing. Right here, we type test. Now we see test barely because it's in black text, and it's also shoved way up to the left-hand side. So we're going to go ahead and fix that with two properties. As you could probably guess, the first one is going to be color. And we're going to go ahead and set the color equal to, right here we can use any value we like. I'm going to stick with our off-white. And we're also going to be setting up some padding, giving us just a little bit of space between the input edge and the actual text inside of the input. I'll use the small size for that one. Now if we resave the input over in the browser, we can actually type something to see if it works. Does this work? And it does indeed work. Things look a whole lot nicer with just a little bit of styling tweaks. Now things match the final version of the application real well. That is exactly what we had over here. It's exactly what we have over here. Everything is still completely functional. We get our error messages, and the error messages go away as we add valid items, or as we have duplicates, the error stays. Perfect. I add a unique item and the error goes away. So that is it for almost the entire application. The only thing really left to style is our form, which still looks just terrible. So in the next one, we're going to look at how we can style third-party components. It's a little trickier than styling our own components because they usually come with pre-built classes, but we're going to get it done nonetheless. So stay tuned, and I'll see you then.